Welcome back. You're watching Good Morning Namibia. The late Bishop Peter Tanyangenge Kalangula was born on the 3rd of December 1926 and died on the 20th of February 2008. He was a Namibian political and religious leader. Bishop Kalangula had an interesting personal history which inter alia involved both politics and the church, which led book author Nelson Kalangula to write a book titled A Namibian of Stature to honor his grandfather's legacy. The author now joins us in studio to tell us more. Good morning, sir, and welcome to Good Morning Namibia.
Good morning, Denver, and good morning, Namibia.
How are you doing on this gift of a Monday morning?
Well, besides the weather, everything is good, and we are blessed to be here.
Very well.
Yes.
Now, despite the late bishop being your grandfather, despite you also experiencing him in person and in the flesh and wanting to honor him, what is it that drove you? What inspired you to capture his legacy in a book?
Well, what inspired me was his interesting history and his way, the way he lived and what he sacrificed throughout his life, sacrificing his time with his family and so forth, just to protect the Ovambo people in Namibia at the time of Ovambo administration. And I thought of to say that this part of history is not really documented, and we cannot afford to have leaders that contributed to a greater Namibia of what it is today and not document them, because we are doing injustice to the future. Hence, they would want to know who their pre-leaders were and who their figures were. And we need to give the Namibian people to celebrate that belongs to Namibia.
Absolutely.
Yes.
What was the most interesting feature of him and the way he lived?
Well, Peter was not an easy man, but very good man and a great sense of humor. And like I said, he had a very giving hand. He often put his community first before everything else.
Including his loved ones?
Including his loved ones. And he always stated that he belongs to the nation. And I thought the nation ought to hear his story and just make their own conclusion as opposed to what they often hear and heard about him.
You just shared with us that your grandfather was not an easy man.
Yes.
Talk to us about his second name and what that means for those not familiar with Oshibambu in that deep sense, and why you would say that he was not an easy human being.
Well, his second name, Oshibambu name, is Tanyangenge, and that means someone who can't really be controlled. Yeah, they are failing to control me. So that, you know, in our culture, when you are given a name, it sort of always resounds with you.
It manifests.
It manifests.
Yeah.
My middle name is Tuafeni, so I'm always happy and delighted person to meet people, and so I'm Tuafeni in my nature. But for Tanyangenge, it was a very difficult name for him, and it of course manifested in his nature. So many people could not handle his persona.
As his grandson, you would have spent a portion of his life with him only. How did you go about researching the other aspects of his life, particularly the time before you were born and those times that you may not have been privy to?
Well, what had happened was I later came to find out about after he died, because I was by his deathbed when he died, and I used to hear a lot of stories from him. But then later I found out that there was something written about him. And that's what I captivated, and I, of course, just broadened it. And I started interviewing people of many walks, particularly people that he served with, and of course, other people also that would come forth. But it was not easy because many people, like I said, his story is not narrated as should be. So many people always felt threatened to come forward and give his story, including many others, friends, family members, and so forth.
Why would they have felt threatened?
Well, he was sort of labeled as a puppet before independence. So anyone that did not go to exile or that served in the government before independence, they would label them as collaborators and so forth. But the argument is, how else would the leaders of the time give service delivery to their people if there is no one in the country.
Very well. You may just want to hold up the book so that
Right.
prospective readers can also be privy to the cover page. Now, talk to us about the culmination of all of that research in the book that you're holding today. It must have been no walk in the park to produce that piece of work.
Absolutely not, because many of the information you don't really find. You go to the archive, you find some of the pages that are missing, where you can clearly see that some of his information was there and so forth. And you take trip to go to the north, to go interview certain person that you have had an agreement with that I'm coming there. And you go there, this person would switch off their phone on you. I mean, it was that difficult. But then those that you find, at least you peruse and you get that information. And what mostly helped was the articles that was written about him, especially by the Windhoek Observer, Windhoek Advertiser at the time, and the Namibian that came through, and of course through the power of Gwen Lister them and all. So Gwen Lister advised me to check through the Namibian articles, and that helped me a lot, because through that you check the dates and time, and of course the people that participated during that time and event. And then of course together with that I put everything together. But what I most interestingly did is surrounding his whole life, during that time of his whole journey, I've put in all parts of Namibian history also, sort of to remind people what our history is like, so we may not forget the whole past overall. So this book in itself is not about Tanyangenge alone, but of course also gives a Namibian history, so something we can take pride in.
Speaking of which, let's establish the correlation for those not in the know. His contribution to the history, particularly as far as the liberation journey within the borders of the country is concerned.
Well, his journey to the liberation struggle started way back, because as you know, in Novemberland, many of the leaders from the north started their journey in Odibo. Many leaders speak so much about Odibo. Now, he was one of the chosen young men to teach many people in schools in Odibo and so forth. But through that, interestingly, he sort of rebelled against the then Bishop Winter. And then, of course, that drove many leaders and motivated many leaders. Many leaders that we still have today were inspired by him through that walkout out of that mismanagement of churches, they would have called it at the time. So he established his own church, which was called Ovambo Independent Church. And that sort of also drove many supporters to him. And of course, they tried to boycott that. And of course, he started having his own church under a tree and so forth. So that inspired many religious people, because he was sanctioned. And then, of course, he resorted back to administration. And then that's how he entered politics again, to start serving the legislative chambers in Novemberland. And through that, he helped shape many policies. In Novemberland, at the time, the Afrikaans was taught, and he put up a policy that Afrikaans should not be taught in Novemberland. English should be taught in Novemberland. And that's how you see the difference now. Many people that are taught in Novemberland do not speak much of Afrikaans but English, because his argument was that English is more global than Afrikaans, and he thought that his people should be prepared educationally for the future so they can engage with the world globally and so forth. So in that, I would say that there is major contribution, because when the oppressors used to drive around in their Caspers and step over fields, he formed up a committee to protect and for people to report to him, so those people can be compensated. And so many people used to run to him from protection. So what had happened was the Boers also didn't like him, but on the other side also, our own brothers that are in exile also thought to him as a collaborator and as a puppet. But like I said, he was Tanyangenge, and his name spoke loudly about that, and he was no puppet and no pushover. Yes.
And it's important for that to be captured.
Yes.
You did share with us earlier that you spent some time next to his deathbed.
Yes.
Is there anything that stood out from that time and what he shared with you then?
Yes, particularly that time, it was interesting to see a political figure that is already growing old, but when you're with him, he's afraid of assassination attempts up to that time, because he had several of them that failed on his life. It's all written in the book. And of course, he would always say, let's look at what room I'm being placed in and so forth. So I learned a lot from that, and I could see who is on his visitation list and so forth. So at the time, I used to help him, buy him local newspapers every day up until he was no more. But I learned a lot. I saw a lot, and I heard a lot at
Such
the time.
fond memories. Now, we don't want to preempt the book entirely.
Right.
Where is it available and what is the investment?
It is available. People can contact me directly on 081 28 90 877. And of course, I'm trying now to motivate others also because, by the way, this is a self-published book. I published it myself just to show the Namibian people that we also can write books about our own history. And of course, at the same time, we can also publish our own books. So they can find me on my personal phone. They can also go on Twitter, Facebook, find me by Nelson Kalangula, or they can go on Twitter, Facebook, look up a Namibian of Stature. Then they should be able to perhaps DM me. Then I should be able to engage and ensure that a copy gets to where they're in Namibia. But I'm currently working on Amazon also to get the book on KDP. I'm looking for professionals to help me with that. And then, of course, we can just get this book also to the international audience out there so everyone can read and learn about Namibian history.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing such insights on your late grandfather who made a significant contribution to the liberation of our country. May the book sell wonderfully.
Thank you, Denver.
There you have it, Mr. Nelson Kalangula, book author, talking to us about the journey of his late grandfather, who was both a preacher but also a political leader and who made an immense contribution to the liberation of our country within the borders of Namibia. First National Bank Namibia visited the Namibian Broadcasting Corporation to educate and share insight on their services